So I brought some little toys some props to go along with me. So I want to take you back to 1966. 1966, computers were programmed with these things. They're called punch cards. Information was stored on this, magnetic tape. A lot of information stored on it, very hard to access it. But the reason I brought you back to 1966 is not talk about these devices. Back in this day, by the way, it was a very closed society. Computers were literally in glass rooms locked up. Nothing was open about it. But the reason I mentioned 1966 was because on September 8th, 1966, it was a very important date for some people. For other people, it was just another television show, not a very successful television show that opened on NBC, and that show was called Star Trek. By the way, not successful, only lasted 3 seasons. But Star Trek brought a couple of very interesting innovations, and in fact, 3 pillars of what we're now using as the technology of today. The first one, of course, was the communicator. You all remember this thing? Beam me up, Scotty. It even makes a little funny noise here. This thing was a wireless communications device in 1966. Now, this was back in the day when phones were physically wired, cell phones were still 7 years from being invented, and this thing had GPS. It was 7 years later before this thing first happened, which, by the way, was 40 years ago just last week, and it was done, the first phone call was done just over here on 6th Avenue by the Hilton. It took 20 more years before GPS came along. This was one of the very first commercial. Actually, it was here before that in military, but before GPS became readily available. But the second thing that I want to talk about that happened in 1966 was they envisioned something called cloud computing. Literally cloud computing. There was this thing called the Starship Enterprise that was up in the sky, and these devices wirelessly communicated up to it, and the Starship was connecting wirelessly to other starships and vast amounts of information. And you talk to these computers by voice. No computers, no mice, no keyboard. You just talk to them. And one of the things that was interesting was this. This is a toy. It was called the tricorder. Even my little one makes the appropriate science fiction sounds. And it had a device here, a little sensor, that you go along and it would sense certain things. This is 1966. But where, in fact, is it really going? Where has it gone? Well, today, if you have a car and you have a little thing called check engine light, you can plug this into your car, this little device. It'll automatically tell you what's wrong with that check engine light. By the way, great thing if you're worried about being ripped off by the garage. But more importantly, I've started thinking, why don't we have a check engine light for our life? What about our bodies? What about our innovations? So about 7 years ago, 2007, AT&T and Apple sort of upset the apple cart. Up until then, cell phones, these devices, were basically for voice. It was a very closed society. The biggest innovation was this thing here. This was a few years later, like 20 years later, and basically still a cell phone. It wasn't until 2007 when Apple and AT&T broke the mold and came out with this, and this, believe it or not, still works, is an iPhone, the original iPhone. It had no capability of apps or anything else, and the App Store was all closed, but it was the opening of a very new involvement, and it became something called jailbreaking. And that jailbreaking started opening up all kinds of capabilities. So now, this device here, which we think of as a cell phone, actually is not a cell phone at all. It is a computer connected to a vast computer in the sky. Think Starship Enterprise, except this is the modern version of it. So now we have devices. I wear one of these, this little sensor here that measures my activity. Here's another version of it. This thing will measure my sleep. This thing will measure my running, if I'm running, and my pulse. But these devices are just the beginning of what's happening. Now all of a sudden it became open. When the cell phone no longer was just a phone, but it became open, all kinds of new capabilities happened. And now we're seeing some really exciting things. For example, there's some diseases that you can die from if you don't know how about it. That if you know your blood oxygen level, if you know your certain attributes of your blood, this little sensor will do it. This device here, only available for doctors, but it's still very interesting. This is, hard to see it here, but this actually is an EKG. That is my EKG being read now. This thing is wireless. So I can now have a doctor anywhere in the world put this against your body, put your fingers on it, I can now diagnose you. That starts to change things, all because of the openness. And soon these sensors are going to be nothing more than a piece of plastic. This is a printed circuit, flexible, digital Band-Aid, stick it on you. That's where the things are going. But it's not just for medical diagnosis. In fact, it's also being used for elder care. You're seeing situations where, for example, this is a pill bottle, which is used to determine whether someone's taken their pill. It's a wirelessly Wi-Fi connected pill bottle. These are sensors, like you have motion sensors in your home. But you take the sensors, you add the pill bottle, you can now know someone's activity. They all talk to a little hub. Here's the hub, goes in your home, and it'll actually tell you whether an older person is alive, is working well, is moving around, etc. And in fact, yeah, they're alive too. And this is one you may not want to have. This is a bathroom scale. Yes, it's Wi-Fi connected. It'll even tweet your weight. But more importantly, it'll take this information, it will tie it with your activity, it will tie it with your motions, your pills, and everything else. And now all of a sudden, we're allowing seniors to stay in their homes longer because we can monitor and we can see slight changes. There's a project that's being put together. It's being put together by Qualcomm, and it's called, of all things, the Qualcomm Tricorder X Prize. And the message is, basically, what this thing did, science fiction, back in 1966, is to make it real. They're very close. Their object is to get 16 diseases this thing will diagnose remotely, without a doctor, and allow you to remotely treat them. And all of this is because we went from this device, which is just a phone, to all of a sudden opening it up to a device here. Now you're saying, well, Tricorder did other things. It's not just phones. For example, these are sensors that are used for, the Tricorder was also used if you went to a foreign planet, was it air breathable, could you live on it, etc. This is an environmental sensor. It does temperature and humidity, all the rest, but also looks at air quality. These things are wirelessly connected. This is a thermostat, which automatically adjusts the temperature whether you're near your house or far from your house. It'll automatically determine whether you're there and change it using geofences. This is a sensor. You can put different nodes on here. And yes, radiation, this is a radiation sensor. Now all of this is all because we allowed it to be open. Now this openness has gone much further than just these innovations here built by companies. And I have three examples. First is this little thing here called Little Bits. I'm not going to do it right now, but these are little devices in here which will allow a kid or a student to actually plug these things together and actually start learning about circuitry. But even more interesting is this. This is called the Raspberry Pi. This was put together by a school teacher in England, deciding that because they were tired of kids taking apart the computers. This little thing, they sell maybe 10,000 of them. They've actually sold over 1 million in a very short time. This is a full computer. And the nice thing about it, $25. But if you really want to understand where innovation and openness is going, remember that company that started putting it all together with Apple and AT&T? Well, guess what? They did it again. This is not released until Friday, but this is the Facebook phone. It's not really a Facebook phone. It's a phone by HTC, marketed by AT&T. But what they've done, Facebook, this is an Android phone. It's Android, a competitor of Facebook, but Android is an open source system. And so they've allowed to put on top of this is my Facebook homepage on here. So all the information, all my tweets, all my photos and everything else involving Facebook, all of it's on here. So this becomes my Facebook open persona. And all of this is because we've allowed it to be open. We've gone from this closed system to the Apple iPhone, and now here we are building a completely new thing. The next 4 billion people who are connected to the internet are not going to be connected by computers with wires. They'll be connected on devices like this. They'll be connected using phones. This is where the future is, and it's all because of openness. Thank you so much.